Hi, I'm Kubi Ackerman. I work at the Urban Design Lab, which is part of the Earth Institute at Columbia University. And we're a small research unit made up of architects, planners, and designers who work with the earth and environmental scientists at the Earth Institute to look at some of the complex social and economic and environmental challenges that are facing cities in the 21st century. And one of the projects we're working on has to do with food systems, and so it's a great, great thing to follow the previous presentation, because it's very closely related. So part of the reason we're interested in this as planners is that one of the major challenges we're facing is that for the first time in human history, as of a couple of years ago, a majority of the world's population is now living in cities. And there's a lot of different reasons for this, but one of the main reasons is changes in agricultural technology, which have displaced people from the countryside into cities. And this is a change that happened in the US much earlier, but globally this is a major, major issue. And so in that sense, and in a lot of other senses, food systems and urban development are very intimately linked. We started off on this work with a project we were doing with a group up at MIT looking at childhood obesity. And we very quickly focused on the food system, and specifically changes to the food system that happened during the 20th century that caused this line, which is available calories per capita, to kind of jump the rails around 1980. And there were a number of economic and policy decisions that actually caused that to happen, which we started to focus on. And these changes have had huge environmental and social impacts, as well as economic impacts. So this is a report from the Congressional Budget Office that predicts that by 2080, if current trends continue, up to 50% of the entire US GDP will be consumed by healthcare costs. And that's due almost entirely to the incidence of chronic diseases like diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease, all of which have a dietary component. So those changes to the food system that I was talking about before have the potential to completely bankrupt the economy. So this is something that we, as planners, were interested in from kind of a spatial dimension. So you might be aware of the fact that, in the center of the country is where most of our commodity crop production takes place, things like corn, wheat, ethanol. That's also where some of the most fertile land in the entire world is located, whereas around our cities, like on the coasts, you have a lot more production of fruits and vegetables, even though there's a lot less agricultural land. So there's already the conditions in place around a lot of our cities to start to be able to regionalize the system a little bit more to get more fresh fruits and vegetables into our cities. Unfortunately, the current federal policies around things like the Farm Bill don't really support that system. So if you look at concentration of subsidies, they're almost entirely concentrated in the areas where the commodity crops are being grown. So we decided to focus a little bit on the New York City region, and I wanted to start out with a slide just showing a couple of the watersheds, because I think the watersheds provide a great precedent, both in terms of just thinking about the whole concept of a watershed. There's now the concept of a food shed, which people have been talking about. It's essentially a geographic area from which a vital resource for a certain population can be sourced. But also in terms of policy, the New York City watershed in particular is a great precedent for the city agencies cooperating with their rural counterparts to essentially enact really progressive land use planning policies to ensure that, again, a critical resource is being protected for the city. So we think that something similar could happen for food. Of course, food is much more complicated in a lot of ways, and so part of this project is to essentially start to define what that capacity could be right now, based on existing patterns of agriculture, where areas might be for expansion of agriculture, other population centers within the area that would also have to be served by the system. But the real focus of this, which we discovered very quickly upon starting this project and talking to a lot of people who have been in this field for a lot longer than we have, is really the transportation, processing, and distribution infrastructure, which is the main bottleneck of a lot of this. So there's just hugely inadequate processing in particular in this region. So we started to focus on that, and we're trying to find different ways for mapping the transportation infrastructure. This is a map of essentially all the areas that are within a 4-hour drive of Manhattan. And we're focusing on, so we started to break this down a little bit more by food group to see where different types of foods are being produced, to enable us to understand where some of the aggregation and processing hubs might be located, so what kind of the optimal places for that might be. So this is still pretty abstract right now, but we hope to be able to make it much more specific, so focusing in on a place like Orange County, which is highly agriculturist, the Black Dirt region. I don't know if you know about it. There's a lot of onions and other types of fruits and vegetables that get produced there. This is where the farmland is. This is the transportation infrastructure. There's a lot of farmers up there, some of whom we're talking to try and help us understand, again, where the optimal placement of something like a food aggregation and distribution hub might be next to some of the existing highway and rail infrastructure. And another important piece of this is the retail environment. So not only looking at where the existing retail is, but also where things like food deserts, which are areas that have inadequate access to fresh and healthy foods, both in cities and in rural areas, are located. We really see the food system as a way to start to reintegrate urban and rural economies. And this is really important because of some of the stuff I was talking about earlier around obesity. If you look at within cities like Chicago or New York, the correlation between obesity and areas that are defined as food deserts, which you can see in that kind of dark blue on the right, there's a very high degree of correlations, particularly when you focus on particular neighborhoods that have the highest rates of obesity, like East Harlem and Brownsville. Those are the same areas that don't have access to fresh and healthy foods. And there's discrepancies between, say, like the Upper East Side, where the obesity rate is 9%, and East Harlem, where it's over 30%, are very striking. So this is something that a lot of policymakers are getting interested in. So we worked with the Manhattan Borough President's Office on this. We worked with the City Council on the release of the Food Works document, which came out last year, which is a very comprehensive food policy plan, and the new version of Plan NYC, which is supposed to come out sometime this year. We're hoping we should have a chapter on food. So this is also related to a couple other projects that we have going on in the lab, which are all kind of part of this larger project. One is an assessment of the urban agricultural capacity of the city, so looking at land use patterns and vacant land and other land that might be able to be used for agriculture, and what some of the green infrastructure implications of this are. So looking at the potential for urban agriculture to mitigate stormwater runoff and the heat island effect, which was presented earlier. And ultimately, we're excited about this project. We're in touch with other organizations around the country and other cities that are trying to do similar things, and we think that there's real potential in New York City, especially given that it's the largest metropolitan area in the country, to really set a precedent around a lot of these issues. Thanks.